I need to tell you something that might completely change how you think about astrological compatibility. And honestly, this realization hit me so hard when I first understood it, because everything I'd been taught about zodiac relationships suddenly made sense in a completely different way. You know how everyone says water and fire don't mix? Our astrology books will tell you that water signs and fire signs are fundamentally incompatible. That one will extinguish the other. That it's a recipe for disaster. I used to believe that too. I used to look at these pairings and think, well, that's never going to work. But here's what nobody tells you. Some of the most intense, transformative, soul-shaking relationships I've ever witnessed have been between water and fire signs. And I'm not talking about toxic intensity. I'm talking about the kind of connection that fundamentally changes both people. That creates something neither of them could have become alone. So if you're a Cancer, Scorpio, or Pisces who's found yourself inexplicably drawn to an Aries, or Sagittarius, or if you're a fire sign who can't stop thinking about that water sign who makes absolutely no logical sense for you, I really want you to stay with me on this one. Because what I'm about to share isn't just theory. This is about understanding why your nervous system responds to this person in ways you can't control. Why the chemistry feels electric even when the logic says it shouldn't work. And why this supposedly impossible pairing might actually be exactly what your soul needs right now. Does that resonate? Because I think there's something profound happening when these elements collide. Something that goes way deeper than surface level compatibility. Let me start with what actually happens when water meets fire in the real world. Not in some abstract astrological sense, but in your actual lived experience. When a water sign walks into a room where a fire sign is holding court, there's this immediate recognition. It's not always comfortable. In fact, it's usually not comfortable, but it's undeniable. The fire sign feels it first. Usually, they're performing. They're radiating. They're taking up space the way fire signs do. And then they lock eyes with the water sign across the room and something shifts. Suddenly they're not performing anymore. They're seen. And for a fire sign, right? Being truly seen. Not just admired or applauded, but actually witnessed in their full complexity. That's intoxicating. The water sign feels it differently. They've been observing, feeling the emotional temperature of the room, staying in their protective shell. And then the fire sign's energy hits them like a wave of heat. It's overwhelming. It's too much. But it's also exactly what they didn't know they were craving. Because water signs spend so much time in the depths, in the emotional undercurrents, that they forget what it feels like to be pulled up into the light, to be warned, to be invited to play instead of just feel. This initial attraction, it's not about shared values or common interests or any of the things compatibility charts tell you to look for. This is elemental. This is your body recognizing something it needs, even if your mind hasn't caught up yet. I've seen this play out so many times. The Cancer who swore they'd never date another Aries after the last one broke their heart. But then they meet this new Aries and within weeks they're completely consumed. The Scorpio who knows, logically, that the Leo's ego is going to be a problem. But they can't stop showing up anyway because something about that Ola energy makes them feel alive in a way nothing else does. The Pisces who gets absolutely wrecked by the Sagittarius' blunt honesty, but keeps coming back because finally, someone is telling them the truth instead of trying to protect their feelings. And it works both ways. The Aries who's never been able to slow down long enough to actually feel anything. But the Cancer's emotional depth stops them in their tracks. The Leo who's spent their whole life being the star. But the Scorpio sees through the performance to the vulnerable human underneath. The Sagittarius who's always running toward the next adventure. But the Pisces makes them want to stay, to build something, to create a home in another person. This is what I mean when I say water and fire don't mix. Yet they insist on loving. It's not that it's easy. It's that it's necessary. It's that something in each element recognizes what it's missing in the other. And that recognition creates a pull so strong that logic becomes irrelevant. But here's where it gets complicated. And this is the part I really need you to understand. The same qualities that create the attraction are the exact qualities that create the conflict. The fire sign's directness that the water sign found so refreshing at first. 6 months in, it feels like cruelty. The water sign's emotional depth that the fire sign found so fascinating. Now it feels like drowning. The fire sign says what they mean. They don't hint. They don't imply. They don't leave breadcrumbs for you to follow. They just tell you. And for a water sign who's spent their whole life reading between the lines, interpreting subtle emotional cues, navigating unspoken dynamics, this directness can feel like violence. It can feel like the fire sign doesn't care enough to be gentle, doesn't understand that words have weight, doesn't realize that some things need to be approached carefully. But from the fire sign's perspective, they're being honest. They're being authentic. They're giving the water sign exactly what they claim to want, which is truth. And when the water sign reacts with hurt or withdrawal, the fire sign feels confused and frustrated. I was just being real with you. Why are you making this so complicated? Meanwhile, the water sign is processing everything through layers of emotional context that the fire sign doesn't even know exist. They're not just hearing the words. They're feeling the energy behind the words. The implications, claims, right? The potential future consequences. The way this moment connects to every other moment in the relationship. And when they try to explain this to the fire sign, it sounds like they're overcomplicating something simple. It sounds like they're creating problems that don't exist. This is the fundamental tension. Fire signs live in the moment. They experience life as a series of present tense events. What's happening right now is what's real. Water signs live in the emotional continuum. They experience life as a flowing river where everything is connected to everything else. Where the past informs the present and the present shapes the future. Where nothing exists in isolation. So when a fire sign says something hurtful in the heat of an argument and then apologizes an hour later, they genuinely believe the issue is resolved. They said they were sorry. They meant it. It's over. Move on. But the water sign is still processing the emotional impact of what was said. They're still feeling the wound. And when they try to talk about it days later, the fire sign feels ambushed. They think, why are we still talking about this? I apologized. What more do you want? What the water sign wants is for the fire sign to understand that emotions don't operate on the same timeline as actions. That you can't just apologize and expect the feeling to disappear. That healing takes time. That trust once broken needs to be rebuilt. That some words leave marks that don't fade just because you wish they would. And what the fire sign wants is for the water sign to stop holding on to things. To stop bringing up the past. To stop making everything so heavy and complicated. They want to be able to make mistakes without feeling like they're being put on trial. They want to be forgiven without having to prove themselves over and over. Neither of them is wrong. This is just what happens when fire meets water. The fire sign's strength is their ability to move forward. To not get stuck. To burn through obstacles and keep going. The water sign's strength is their ability to feel deeply. To remember. To honor the emotional truth of their experience. And these strengths, when they collide, create friction. But here's what I've learned. And this is the part that changed everything for me. That friction isn't the problem. The friction is the point. Because what happens in that friction, if both people are willing to stay in it instead of running away, is transformation. The fire sign learns that not everything needs to be solved immediately. They learn that sitting with discomfort, allowing space for feelings to process, doesn't make them weak. It makes them whole. They learn that the water sign's emotional depth isn't manipulation or drama. It's wisdom. It's a way of knowing that the fire sign has never had access to. And once they taste it, once they allow themselves to actually feel instead of just act, something in them softens. Something in them becomes more human. And the water sign learns that not everything needs to be felt so intensely. They learn that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let something go. Move forward. Trust that the relationship can survive conflict without needing to process every single emotional nuance. They learn that the fire sign's directness isn't cruelty, it's clarity. It's a way of being in the world that the water sign has never had access to. And once they taste it, once they allow themselves to speak their truth without drowning in the fear of how it will be received, something in them strengthens. Something in them becomes more free. This is why water and fire insist on loving each other. Not because it's easy, not because it makes sense, but because each element holds the medicine the other needs. The fire sign needs to learn how to feel. The water sign needs to learn how to act. And when they come together, when they're willing to let the other element teach them, they become more complete versions of themselves. I've watched this happen in real time. The Aries who used to bulldoze through every situation suddenly learning to pause, to check in, to ask their Cancer partner how they're feeling before making a unilateral decision. And the Cancer learning to speak up in the moment instead of retreating into their shell and expecting the Aries to read their mind. Both of them becoming better humans because of what the other element demanded from them. The Leo who used to need constant validation suddenly learning to sit in quiet intimacy with their Scorpio partner. Discovering that being seen in silence is actually more powerful than being applauded in public. And the Scorpio learning to celebrate their partner's wins without feeling threatened. Learning that the Leo's need for recognition isn't about ego. It's about their fundamental life force. Both of them expanding beyond their elemental limitations. The Sagittarius who used to run from anything that felt too heavy suddenly learning to stay, to build, to commit to their Pisces partner's vision of a shared future. And the Pisces learning to adventure, to take risks, to trust that not everything needs to be perfectly safe before they can move forward. Both of them discovering capacities they didn't know they had. This is the gift of the water-fire pairing. It's not comfortable. It's not easy. But it's transformative in a way that same-element relationships rarely are. Because when you're with someone who operates from the same element, you reinforce each other's patterns. You validate each other's worldview. You stay in your comfort zone together. And that's beautiful in its own way. But it doesn't push you to grow. When water meets fire, growth isn't optional. You either evolve or you combust. And for the people who are willing to do the work, who are willing to let themselves be changed by the other element, the result is a relationship that's deeper, richer, and more alive than anything they could have created alone. I've carefully reviewed the first section and understand the narrative flow and style. I'll now continue with the middle third of the script, maintaining the conversational, introspective tone while introducing new core arguments with specific examples. But let me be completely honest with you about something that nobody talks about when they romanticize these water-fire connections. There's a very real danger here, real danger. And I think you need to hear this before you convince yourself that the intensity you're feeling is always a sign you should stay. Because here's what I've noticed. Water and fire relationships have this way of making you feel more alive than you've ever felt. But they can also make you feel more destroyed than you've ever felt. And sometimes, in the middle of all that intensity, it becomes really hard to tell the difference between transformation and trauma. I've seen water signs lose themselves completely in fire sign relationships. The Cancer who becomes so focused on managing the Aries' moods, on making sure they don't get bored or restless, that they forget they have their own needs. The Scorpio who gets so addicted to the Leo's attention that they start performing for it, betraying their own depth in exchange for surface-level validation. The Pisces who absorb so much of the Sagittarius' energy that they can't tell anymore where their partner's dreams end and their own begin. And I've seen fire signs burn themselves out trying to meet water signs' emotional needs. The Aries who exhaust themselves trying to be gentle enough, soft enough, careful enough, until they don't recognize themselves anymore. The Leo who dims their natural radiance because the Scorpio's jealousy makes them feel guilty for shining. The Sagittarius who stops adventuring, stops exploring, stops being themselves because the Pisces needs them to stay close, to be available, to prioritize emotional security over personal freedom. This is the shadow side of water and fire loving each other. When it works, it's alchemy. When it doesn't, it's annihilation. And the line between those two outcomes is thinner than most people realize. So how do you know which one you're in? How do you tell if this intensity is pushing you toward growth or pulling you toward destruction? I think it comes down to one question, and I really want you to sit with this. Are you becoming more yourself in this relationship, or less? Because here's what I've learned about healthy water-fire dynamics. They expand you. They challenge you. They push you beyond your comfort zone. But they don't erase you. The fire sign who's good for the water sign doesn't make them feel like their emotions are too much or their sensitivity is a burden. They create space for those feelings while also inviting the water sign to come up for air, to play, to experience joy without guilt. They say things like, I see how deeply you feel this, and I'm here for it. And also, let's go do something fun because I think you need a break from the heaviness. And the water sign who's good for the fire sign doesn't make them feel like their energy is too much or their directness is cruel. They help the fire sign understand the impact of their words while also celebrating their authenticity. They say things like, I know you didn't mean to hurt me, and I need you to understand why that landed the way it did. And also, I love how honest you are because it makes me feel safe to be honest too. This is the difference between a water-fire relationship that transforms you and one that destroys you. In the healthy version, both elements are honored. In the toxic version, one element is constantly being asked to betray itself to accommodate the other. I watched this play out with a friend of mine, a Scorpio woman who dated a Sagittarius man for 3 years. In the beginning, it was electric. He brought her out of her shell, got her traveling, introduced her to experiences she never would have sought out on her own. She brought him depth, taught him how to sit with difficult emotions, showed him that vulnerability wasn't weakness. They were genuinely good for each other. But somewhere around year 2, things shifted. He started resenting her need for emotional processing. Every time she wanted to talk about something that was bothering her, he'd accuse her of being dramatic, of creating problems where none existed, and she started resenting his need for freedom. Every time he wanted to take a trip or spend time with friends, she'd interpret it as him not caring about her, not prioritizing the relationship. They both started shrinking. He stopped being honest about what he wanted because he didn't want to deal with her emotional reaction. She stopped expressing her needs because she didn't want to be called dramatic. And eventually, they weren't even recognizable as the people who'd fallen in love. The Sagittarius had lost his fire, his spontaneity, his joy. The Scorpio had lost her depth, her intensity, her power. They both betrayed their elements trying to make the relationship work. And in doing so, they destroyed the very thing that had attracted them to each other in the first place. When they finally broke up, it was devastating. But you know what happened after? Within 6 months, they both came back to life. He started traveling again, pursuing adventures, being himself. She started diving deep again, processing her emotions, reclaiming her intensity. And when I talked to her about it, she said something that really stuck with me. She said, I don't regret loving him. I regret forgetting how to love myself while I was loving him. That's the lesson. Water and fire can absolutely work, but not at the cost of either element's essential nature. The fire sign can't be expected to stop burning. The water sign can't be expected to stop flowing. The relationship has to be big enough to hold both elements in their full expression, or it's not the right relationship, no matter how intense the chemistry is. Now, let me tell you about the water-fire pairings that actually make it, because they do exist. I've seen them, I've studied them, and there are patterns in what makes them work that I think are really important to understand. The first pattern is what I call mutual fascination. In the successful water-fire relationships, both people remain genuinely curious about how the other element operates. The fire sign doesn't just tolerate the water sign's emotional depth. They're fascinated by it. They want to understand it. They ask questions. They create space for it. And the water sign doesn't just tolerate the fire sign's directness. They're fascinated by it. They want to learn from it. They practice it themselves. I know a Cancer Aries couple who've been together for 15 years. And one of the things that struck me about them is how much they still talk about their differences. Not in a complaining way, but in this genuinely curious way. The Aries will say things like, "I still don't fully understand how you can remember the emotional tone of a conversation we had 3 years ago, but I'm amazed by it." And the Cancer will say things like, "I still don't fully understand how you can just decide to do something and then do it without overthinking every possible outcome. But I'm learning from watching you." That curiosity keeps the relationship alive. It prevents them from falling into the trap of thinking they've figured each other out, of assuming they know how the other person works. Because the moment you stop being curious about your partner's element, the moment you start expecting them to operate like you do, that's when the problems start. The second pattern is what I call elemental respect. The fire sign has to genuinely respect the water sign's way of processing the world, even when they don't understand it. And the water sign has to genuinely respect the fire sign's way of moving through the world, even when it scares them. This means the fire sign can't dismiss the water sign's feelings as overreactions. They can't roll their eyes when the water sign needs time to process something. They can't make the water sign feel like their emotional nature is a flaw that needs to be fixed. Even if the fire sign doesn't naturally operate that way, they have to respect that it's valid, that it's real, that it's how their partner experiences life, and the water sign can't punish the fire sign for being direct. They can't expect the fire sign to read their mind or pick up on subtle cues. They can't make the fire sign feel like their natural way of communicating is cruel or insensitive, even if the water sign wishes the fire sign would be more gentle. They have to respect that directness is how their partner shows love. That honesty is how their partner builds trust. I've seen relationships fall apart because this respect wasn't there. The Leo who constantly mocked their Pisces partner for being too sensitive, for crying too easily, for taking things too personally. The Pisces eventually shut down completely, stopped sharing their feelings, stopped being themselves. And then the Leo complained that the Pisces had become distant and cold. But they'd created that distance by refusing to respect their partner's emotional nature. Or the Scorpio who punished their Sagittarius partner every time they were too blunt. Every time they said something without considering how it would land emotionally. The Sagittarius started walking on eggshells, second-guessing everything they said, losing their natural spontaneity. And then the Scorpio complained that the Sagittarius had become boring and predictable. But they'd created that dynamic by refusing to respect their partner's communicative nature. Respect doesn't mean you have to become like your partner. It means you have to honor that their way of being in the world is just as valid as yours, even when it's completely different. The third pattern, and this is the one I think is most important, is what I call conscious integration. The water-fire couples who make it long-term aren't just tolerating their differences. They're actively learning from each other. They're consciously integrating the other element into their own way of being. The fire sign learns to pause before speaking, to consider the emotional impact of their words, to create space for feelings to be processed. They don't become a water sign, but they develop water sign capacities. They become more emotionally intelligent, more attuned to subtle dynamics, more capable of depth, and the water sign learns to act without overthinking, to speak their truth in the moment, to trust that the relationship can handle directness. They don't become a fire sign, but they develop fire sign capacities. They become more confident, more assertive, more capable of forward movement. I know a Pisces-Leo couple where this integration is so beautiful to watch. The Pisces has learned to celebrate the Leo's wins without feeling threatened by them, to take up space in social situations instead of always observing from the sidelines, to express their needs directly instead of hoping the Leo will intuit them. And the Leo has learned to sit in quiet intimacy without needing to perform, to check in on the Pisces' emotional state before making big decisions, to understand that sometimes the most powerful thing they can do is just listen. Neither of them has lost their essential nature. The Pisces is still deeply intuitive and emotionally attuned. The Leo is still charismatic and confident. But they've both expanded beyond their elemental limitations by learning from each other, and that expansion, that's what makes the relationship sustainable long-term. Because here's the thing about water and fire. When they come together unconsciously, when neither person is willing to learn or grow or change, they create steam, and steam dissipates. It doesn't last. But when they come together consciously, when both people are committed to integration, to becoming more whole by learning from the other element, they create something entirely new. They create a third element that's neither water nor fire but something that contains the gifts of both. This is what I mean when I say water and fire insist on loving each other. It's not just about attraction. It's not just about chemistry. It's about the soul-level recognition that this person, this element, holds something you need to become who you're meant to be. And if you're willing to do the work, if you're willing to let yourself be changed, the result is a love that's deeper and more transformative than anything you could have imagined. But you have to be willing. You have to be conscious. You have to choose integration over annihilation. And that choice, that's what determines whether your water-fire love story becomes a cautionary tale or a testament to what's possible when two opposite elements refuse to give up on each other. I want to talk about something that I think is the real secret to making water-fire relationships work. And it's something that took me years to understand. It's not about compatibility. It's not about compromise. It's about what I call elemental sovereignty. Here's what I mean by that. Most relationship advice tells you that love is about meeting in the middle, about finding common ground, about becoming more alike over time. And maybe that works for some pairings, but for water and fire, that approach is actually poison. Because when you try to meet in the middle between water and fire, you know what you get? You get lukewarm. You get tepid. You get a relationship that's lost all its power because both elements have diluted themselves trying to become something they're not. The water-fire couples who actually thrive long-term, they're not trying to become more alike. They're becoming more fully themselves while learning to dance with someone who's fundamentally different. The fire sign doesn't become less fiery. The water sign doesn't become less watery. Instead, they both become more skilled at honoring their own element while creating space for the other. I watched this unfold with a Scorpio-Sagittarius couple I know. In the beginning, they were constantly trying to change each other. The Scorpio wanted the Sagittarius to be more emotionally available, more present, more willing to dive deep into heavy conversations. The Sagittarius wanted the Scorpio to be lighter, more spontaneous, more willing to just have fun without analyzing everything. And they were both miserable because they were essentially asking each other to betray their elemental nature. The breakthrough came when they stopped trying to change each other and started getting curious about how to honor both elements simultaneously. The Scorpio realized that the Sagittarius' need for freedom wasn't a rejection of intimacy. It was how they maintained their fire, their vitality, their ability to bring fresh energy back into the relationship. And the Sagittarius realized that the Scorpio's need for depth wasn't them being difficult or dramatic. It was how they maintained their water, their emotional intelligence, their ability to create real intimacy. So they created what they called elemental agreements. The Sagittarius got their adventure time, their solo trips, their nights out with friends, without the Scorpio making them feel guilty or questioning their commitment. And the Scorpio got their deep dive time, their emotional processing conversations, their need for intense one-on-one connection, without the Sagittarius dismissing it as too heavy or trying to lighten the mood. And here's what happened. When the Sagittarius came back from their adventures, they were more present, more engaged, more capable of meeting the Scorpio's emotional depth because they'd refilled their fire. And when the Scorpio got their emotional needs met, they were more playful, more spontaneous, more capable of joining the Sagittarius in their adventures because they felt secure in the relationship's foundation. This is elemental sovereignty. It's the understanding that you don't have to sacrifice your element to love someone from a different element. In fact, you can't. Because the moment you betray your elemental nature, you lose the very thing that attracted your partner in the first place. The fire sign who dims their light to make the water sign feel more comfortable. They become resentful. They feel trapped. They start looking for ways to reignite their fire, and often that means looking outside the relationship. The water sign who suppresses their emotional depth to avoid overwhelming the fire sign. They become disconnected. They feel unseen. They start withdrawing into themselves. And the fire sign ends up with a partner who's physically present but emotionally absent. But when both people commit to elemental sovereignty, when they say I'm going to be fully fire and you're going to be fully water and we're going to figure out how to make that work, that's when the magic happens. Because then you're not in a relationship with a diluted version of your partner. You're in a relationship with them at full power. And yes, that's more intense. Yes, that requires more skill. But it's also infinitely more alive. Now, I need to address something that I think is crucial for water signs specifically. Because I've noticed a pattern that concerns me. Water signs. You have this tendency to make yourselves responsible for managing the fire signs' impact. You absorb their heat. You cushion their directness. You translate their bluntness into something more palatable for yourself. And you do this because you're naturally empathic. Because you can feel the energy behind their words. Because you understand that they don't mean to hurt you. But here's what I need you to hear. It's not your job to protect yourself from your partner's element. It's your partner's job to learn how to express their element in a way that doesn't damage you. The fire sign who truly loves you will learn to modulate their heat. Not extinguish it, but modulate it. They'll learn that there's a difference between being honest and being brutal. Between being direct and being careless. Between speaking their truth and weaponizing their words. They'll learn to ask themselves, is what I'm about to say true and necessary and kind? And if it's not all three, they'll find a different way to say it. And you, water sign, right? You need to stop making excuses for fire signs who refuse to do this work. You need to stop telling yourself that their hurtful words are just their nature. That you're too sensitive, that you need to toughen up. Because here's the truth. You're not too sensitive. You're appropriately sensitive. Your emotional attunement is a gift, not a flaw. And any fire sign who makes you feel like you need to apologize for your water nature doesn't deserve access to your depths. I've seen too many water signs lose themselves in fire sign relationships because they convinced themselves that love meant accepting whatever heat came their way. The Cancer who stayed with an Aries who regularly said cruel things in anger because the Aries always apologized afterward. The Pisces who tolerated a Leo's constant need for attention and validation because they didn't want to seem unsupportive of it. The Scorpio who endured a Sagittarius' emotional unavailability because they told themselves that's just how fire signs are. No, that's not how healthy fire signs are. Healthy fire signs learn to wield their element responsibly. They learn that their directness is a gift when it's used to illuminate truth, but a weapon when it's used to avoid accountability. They learn that their spontaneity is beautiful when it invites adventure, but destructive when it disregards their partner's need for stability. They learn that their confidence is magnetic when it's grounded in genuine self-worth, but toxic when it requires constant validation from their partner. And water signs, stained white. You need to hold fire signs accountable for this growth, not by trying to change them, not by making them feel bad about their element, but by having clear boundaries about what you will and won't accept, by saying things like, I love your honesty, and I need you to deliver it with care. I love your spontaneity, and I need you to consider how your choices affect me. I love your confidence, and I need you to make space for my feelings too. This is how water signs maintain their sovereignty in fire sign relationships. Not by becoming less water, but by insisting that the fire sign learn to work with water instead of evaporating it. And fire signs, I need to talk to you too. Because you have your own pattern that concerns me. You have this tendency to see the water sign's emotional needs as obstacles to your freedom. You interpret their need for processing as them being difficult. You experience their depth as them being heavy. And you start to resent them for not being more like you, for not being able to just move on. Let go. Lighten up. But here's what I need you to understand. The water sign's emotional depth is not a burden you're being asked to carry. It's a gift you're being invited to receive. Because what the water sign is offering you is the capacity to feel your life instead of just living it. They're offering you access to emotional wisdom that you don't naturally have. They're offering you the chance to become more whole. And yes, that requires you to slow down. Yes, that requires you to sit with discomfort. Yes, that requires you to develop capacities that don't come naturally to you. But isn't that what growth is? Isn't that what love is supposed to do? Push you beyond your limitations. Invite you into a fuller version of yourself. The fire sign who truly loves their water sign partner will learn to value emotional depth even when it's uncomfortable. They'll learn that not everything needs to be solved immediately. That some things need to be felt before they can be released. That sitting with your partner in their pain is sometimes more loving than trying to fix it. They'll learn to ask themselves, what is my partner trying to tell me beneath their words? What do they need from me right now that they might not be able to articulate? And fire signs, right? You need to stop making the water sign feel like their emotional nature is too much. You need to stop saying things like you're so dramatic or why do you have to make everything so complicated or can't you just let it go? Because when you say those things, what the water sign hears is you're too much, strange. Your feelings don't matter. I don't want to deal with the real you. I've seen too many fire signs destroy beautiful relationships because they refuse to develop emotional capacity. The Aries who left a Cancer because couldn't handle the Cancer's need for emotional security. The Leo who cheated on a Scorpio because they felt suffocated by the Scorpio's intensity. The Sagittarius who ghosted a Pisces because they didn't want to deal with the Pisces' feelings about them leaving. And you know what happened to those fire signs? They ended up in relationships with other fire signs, thinking that would be easier, and it was easier. For a while. But eventually, they realized something was missing. They realized that without the water sign's depth, their life felt shallow. Without the water sign's emotional intelligence, their relationships felt superficial. Without the water sign's capacity to feel, they felt disconnected from their own humanity. Because here's the truth that fire signs eventually learn. You need water. You need someone who can help you access the parts of yourself that you've been running from. You need someone who can show you that vulnerability isn't weakness. That feeling deeply isn't a waste of time. That emotional intimacy is actually the most powerful form of connection that exists. This is how fire signs maintain their sovereignty in water sign relationships. Not by becoming less fire, but by learning to let their fire be tempered by water, shaped by it, made more powerful through the integration of depth. So here's what I want you to take away from all of this. If you're in a water-fire relationship, or if you're considering one, understand that this is not going to be easy. This is not going to be comfortable. There will be moments when you question whether it's worth it, when you wonder if you'd be better off with someone more like you, when you feel exhausted by the constant negotiation between elements. But if you're both willing to do the work, if you're both committed to maintaining your elemental sovereignty while learning from each other, if you're both brave enough to let this relationship transform you, what you'll create together is something extraordinary. You'll create a love that's both passionate and deep, both exciting and secure, both free and committed. You'll create a relationship that honors both elements in their full expression while weaving them together into something entirely new. The water sign will learn to act, to speak up, to take risks, to trust that they can handle whatever comes. The fire sign will learn to feel, to slow down, to create depth there, to trust that vulnerability is actually strength, and together, you'll become more complete versions of yourselves than you ever could have been alone. This is why water and fire insist on loving each other, not because it's easy, not because it makes sense on paper, but because somewhere deep in your soul, you recognize that this person, this element, is exactly what you need to become who you're meant to be, and that recognition, that's O-level knowing, is more powerful than any compatibility chart, any logical analysis, any well-meaning advice from people who don't understand what you're building together. So if you're a water sign who's fallen for a fire sign, or a fire sign who's fallen for a water sign, I want you to know this. You're not crazy. You're not making a mistake. You're not ignoring red flags or settling for someone who's wrong for you. You're answering a call that your soul recognizes even if your mind doesn't fully understand it yet. You're choosing the path of transformation over the path of comfort. And that choice, that brave, terrifying, beautiful choice, is one of the most powerful things you can do in this lifetime. Just remember, water and fire can create steam that dissipates, or they can create the conditions for new life to emerge. The difference is consciousness, commitment, and the willingness to honor both elements in their full power.